Hi again, everybody. So this is part two of the About the Course series, and in this one we're going to talk a little bit more about content. And this one's going to be brief. It's just a really quick overview of the main topics of the course. So one of the first things we're going to be learning about, next week, but that we're going to apply for the whole semester, is that anthropology has many different branches, but in an intro course like this one, we tend to focus on the four main subfields, which are listed here: cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology, and linguistic anthropology. And each one of these subfields has its own kind of areas of specialization, and sometimes a bunch of subfields within the subfields. And there are other subfields than these, but that kind of cross over some of them. So it's anthropology is a very broad field, and I'm not kind of gonna give away next week's punchlines about what anthropology is. It's about humans, hint hint. And the subfields kind of already give you a lot of information about that. So yeah, we're going to look at a bunch of different topics from the perspectives of these different subfields. And I'm going to move myself out of the way here, just like in a class. Move out of the way of the screen. So in terms of specific topics, again, these are very broad strokes. We go into more depth than this. At the same time, it's a tip of the iceberg course. This is an introductory course, and it's meant to just give you an idea of what anthropologists do. There's no way we could cover everything about anthropology in one course. And you could get degrees in anthropology and still not cover everything. It's incredibly broad. So the idea is that you get a taste for anthropology, and then it makes you want to take other courses with us at Vanier. We have more advanced courses that go into more depth on a whole bunch of the different topics that we talk about in the intro course. So these are some examples of broad topics. So we look at biological and cultural evolution. So how have humans changed over time, both biologically and culturally? We look at biological variation. So how are people different biologically, but also how are we very similar? Same with culture. There are things that people everywhere in the world have to do. Everybody has to eat. Everybody has to sleep. Everybody, has relationships. But these things happen in different ways in different cultures. So, for example, there's social structures everywhere. Every society in the world has some kind of structure, some kind of system of marriage, some kind of way to define family, some way to distribute power, get food, and all these things. But what that's gonna look like is gonna be different from one place to the next. Language and communication, that's a human universal. And a lot of variation there, but it's something that exists everywhere. And worldview is very connected to culture, and the concept of worldviews helps us think about how people interpret the world around them. So yeah, we're biological beings, for example, but there have been different ideology, and there still are different ideologies and worldviews about what the biological differences between us mean, for example. So at some point in time, some people came up with this idea that there are different human races, for example, and these set divisions between these races. And that worldview helped them justify the idea that some of these races were better than others. So that's why we have these ideas of race and practices around racism that exist in society. And anthropologists generally will say, and this is what we'll talk about in this course, is that there's no scientific basis for the existence of racism among humans. And also, for the most part, there are some anthropologists who are racist. I'm going to be totally honest about that. But as a discipline, anthropology is explicitly against racism. But we look at it into how it's integrated into a culture and how it winds up acting in a social structure. Similar things about gender and sexuality. I mean, humans like to put labels on things, and in every society in the world there are ideas about gender and gender roles and gender norms, but these are different from place to place. And so what it means to be a woman or a man is different from place to place, and whether there is a belief in the existence of other genders, that's different from place to place. sexual practices. I mean, sex is a biological, like something we do with our bodies, but cultures define what is proper and improper sexuality. So that's why I put this under worldview. I mean, it's very much related to things around social structures like marriage and family and things like that, and power. But it has a lot to do with what's up here and how humans try to make sense of the world. Myth and ritual falls under there too, because the knowledge that we have, I mean, if you grew up in the world we have today, so you go to school and you're taught stuff, you read books, all this stuff, but for most of humanity, knowledge was transmitted through stories. And when you think about it, compare the experience of, say, sitting in a classroom with a teacher who talks for an hour and just throws a bunch of information at you, and the experience of going to see a movie or watching a TV show, and how much you remember. Like, what's the difference in how much you remember? For the most part, we remember a lot more through stories. So stories in the form of myth, which, says nothing about truth or untruth here, but they've always contained a lot of cultural knowledge, ways to survive in a specific environment, what's right and what's wrong. And the rituals in which people engage around the world, not necessarily just religious rituals, but all kinds of rituals, help solidify those understandings of the world, in addition to bringing people together. And then how's all this applied? Anthropology has real world applications, because a lot of the stuff we learn is going to be directly connected to real world phenomena, so things that are happening around us, elections, pandemics, but also, over time, the impacts of colonization and globalization on different people in the world, such as, forced migration, or people being ripped away from their land base, being put into poverty. Warfare is another thing that's interesting to talk about, because you might hear this idea that, well, that's how humans are. We're warriors. We fight. We're always in conflict. But we wouldn't have made it to where we are today if that was all human nature was. Cooperation is just as much a part of human nature, and warfare on the scale that we understand it today has not always existed. So it's a complex thing. Resistance, so how do people resist and affirm their own sovereignty in the face of some of these global forces that try to disempower them? These are all interesting things. Basically everything about humans is something that can be discussed in anthropology, and the knowledge from those four subfields and touching on those topics that we saw here can all help us think about a whole bunch of things that are happening in the world today. So I'm excited to go on this journey with you and help expose you to anthropology and what it is, and I hope that you will enjoy it and be motivated to learn more. And we'll be jumping right in as of next week, covering the basics of anthropology.